Hey there, everybody. This is Elijah. Hope you all are doing well this holiday season. Today, we've got a little bit of a different one for you. I recently was given a copy of Ashen by A44 to review and talk about. So, today we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the Gothic roots of Ashen. So, the literary genre entitled the Gothic is the direct ancestor to horror, science fiction, and modern day fantasy. When it really comes down to it, the Gothic finds its roots in legends, ancient curses, and works such as Beowulf, which feature a warrior squaring off against evil forces. What's altogether weird about the genre of literature is that it came at the height of a wave of rational thinking, realistic fiction, and heady essays on philosophy and politics. Isn't it funny how a genre originally regarded as frivolous smut became the backbone for some of the greatest stories ever told?
You are stronger now, child of mine, in spirit, in body, and in the company you keep. Amara was right to offer my help, for the designs of an Elder Dark are arrayed against you.
While a series like Dark Souls and its cousin Bloodborne draw deeply from the Gothic well, they distort it and change it into something far more disturbing and twisted. Sure, they borrow the castles and off putting atmosphere of Gothic literature, but they're soaked in something that transforms the Gothic into something different, which is horror. In order to really make sense of what sets Ashen apart from its forefathers, we need to understand the difference between terror and horror. The differentiation of the meanings of terror and horror come from the Gothic author Anne Radcliffe. She mused that terror was the apprehension of something awful and terrible. That is, the feelings of terror that a character feels generate from inner anxiety. It is solely a feeling of fearing the potential for harm or anticipating something horrific. Horror, then, is stumbling across something that takes a nearly life ending toll on the character. As she puts it, horror freezes and nearly annihilates them. The reason Gothic fiction tries so hard to lean into terror is that it seems to have a deeper access to the sublime. I don't want to dive too far into the philosophy behind the sublime, but it's essentially a concept for immeasurable, uncalculatable, and unimitatable greatness. But I think the genius of Ashen, and ultimately the greatest difference between it and the Soulsborne games that came before it, comes down to these two factors. Dark Souls and Bloodborne embrace horror. They try to reach sublimity through blood-curdling screams and images, vague concepts of life and death, and bizarre forces beyond all comprehension. Some might say that while these games are certainly built on Gothic foundations, they use modern sensibilities to almost cheat their way into reaching the realm of sublimity. But Ashen takes a different route. It chooses the route of terror.
Lady Amara's little Mishra. I took her to Riok, eldest of the three Elder Dark. In return, the Dark One gifted me the Umbral Veil.
This game builds itself on the oldest foundations of the Gothic, a latent power that hides in the dark places, influencing the world with the tyranny of the past. The heart of Gothic literature is a meditation on the fears of its times. Humanity did not know its way forward, which made them fear what came before. They were fearful to make mistakes that ended their predecessors without knowing why. And to Ashen's credit, the world they've built is strangely beautiful. The monsters that live in the dark caves and abandoned forts are truly terrifying, which in some ways makes the game easier than its brutal forefathers. The Soulsborne games thrive on decimating the player. It's designed to punish visually, audibly, and spiritually. How many people do you know who have given up their journeys in these types of games because they've been too disturbed by the visual gore or the horrific difficulty? Some prevail, but many walk away. This is one of the profound effects of Gothic-based horror. You feel small. And for some, that realization is too much to bear. So they walk away from their avatar and the decrepit world they initially wanted to explore. These games make you the Gothic hero, and like many of them, they walk away scarred, vowing to never speak of what happened. Ashen, though, finds a different way. It's hard, yes, but not insurmountable. Harnessing those feelings of terror, that is, the anticipation of something awful, can become a potent fuel that drives a player's character to fulfill the role of a triumphant Gothic hero. And though they fear what is to come, there's no true horror to find. Yet there is something imposing that they must face: the tyranny of the past. They must face off against the lingering effects of pitch-black darkness that plagued the world for so long. The world has come into a new age, but those who've lost themselves in the dark, or even the agents of the dark, must be extinguished to set forward a new path.
The first age saw three creatures of the dark plains rise above all others. The Elder Dark fed upon the light and thrived. The second marked the coming of the Listener Matriarchs, Titans who revered the light. The third breath was the Age of Man, Gethin's children.
Often in Gothic literature, the main characters are simply subjected to the power of the unknown, and rise toward the sublime as terror consumes them. Once they reach past the veil of sublimity, they're faced with the horror that they cannot understand anything beyond what they knew before, and this drives them mad as the realization consumes them. Ashen holds this truth to its chest. As the story unravels, you begin to suspect as the player that greater forces are at work other than the cyclical phenomenon. But as the player reaches towards the veil of sublimity, the creators of this game seek to bring the Gothic to its conclusion. They give the player the tools to set the world right. In this way, the Gothic as a genre evolves. Ashen intends to create an atmosphere of extinguishing the tyranny of the past for a bright and peaceful future. It ultimately robs the Gothic of its tyrannical power by equipping its hero with the will to persevere, to pierce the veil and remain unshaken. They grow as the instrument of terror for their foes, and inevitably become the horror that placates the creatures of the night. That is, they become the tools of sublimity against mere mortals. What is ultimately fascinating to me is that these mere mortals lay the past to rest and rob it of its power. They ultimately flip terror and horror on their heads. As the dark creatures are torn from the veil of sublimity, their usurpers rise to take their place. This flipping creates a far more positive outcome for the Gothic, as it ultimately comes full circle. Even as these heroes conquer terror and horror, they become sublime themselves. It leaves the world in a better place than before. The Gothic evolves into something refreshing, as it's evacuated of the things that make it inaccessible and often off-putting. Likewise, the Soulsborne games often perpetuate the terror and horror of the Gothic by creating situations with recurring cycles. The roads players travel in these games only serve to maintain the power dynamic that the Sublime holds over their respective worlds. The player can either sacrifice themselves to maintain the cycle, or they can resist the sacrifice and let everything fade to black. In these games, the player is given the tools to fight, but never truly overcome. The core of the Gothic in these worlds is so potent and full of tyranny that it simply cannot be broken. At the end of the day, this is the difference between these two styles of Gothic storytelling. Ashen allows the world to be relieved from the tyranny of the past, whereas the Soulsborne titles serve to further the past's tyranny. They are two sides of the same coin, but they both serve to evolve Gothic storytelling. One spins hope, and the other spins despair. One instills terror at the prospect of overcoming the veil of the sublime, and the other instills horror at the prospect of being consumed by the sublime. Thank you so much for listening to this video, guys. I know that it's kinda heady, but if you're into literature, or if you really just like Gothic style games, science fiction, dark fantasy, I really hope that you enjoyed this discussion. If you have any comments, definitely leave them down below. Be sure to please like the video, and if you're willing to, check out my review of Ashen. Without further ado, we'll see you guys next time.